Righty, welcome to TDC's workshops this morning, the 6th of May. We have freedom camping, which we're about to get into, and then a waste workshop afterwards. We'll just whip around and introduce ourselves as per normal, just so anyone watching online or watching the recording later can see who's in the room. So I'm Mayor Nigel.
Stu Paddington, Councillor.
Good morning, everyone. Councillor Michelle Pye.
Good morning, Councillor Scott Shannon.
Kia ora, Councillor Kevin Oliver.
Kia ora, Nigel Trainer, CEO.
Good morning, Andrew Dixon, Group Manager Infrastructure.
Brendan Madley, part of the policy team.
Good morning, Stacey Scott.
Good morning, Peter Burke, Councillor.
Good morning, everyone. Owen Jackson, Timaru District Ward Member. I was just trying to make it a bit different. That sounded so boring.
Kia ora. Good morning, Councillor Sally Parker.
Councillor Alan Booth.
Wonderful. When you retire from radio, are we going to experience more of that around the table? We're going to be your outlet.
It's not far away, you wish.
And welcome also to members of the public. I'll pass over to you to lead us off, Brendan.
Thank you, Mayor Nigel. Good morning, councillors. Thank you for making the time to receive this workshop on freedom camping on the survey that you asked us to undertake. I've been given about an hour. The first half I intend roughly to take you through the survey results, and then the second half is sort of a free format discussion with some leading questions from us to help guide that. In that second half, Nigel from Venture Timaru is going to join us as well to help provide a wider lens and perspective to that as well. So very briefly, just setting the scene. So currently, in regards to freedom camping in the district, the national default rule as set in legislation is that only certified self-contained vehicles can freedom camp and anyone can tent. You do need a bylaw to deviate away from that, either to be more enabling, for example, to allow non-certified self-contained vehicles to freedom camp, or to be more restrictive, for example, in terms of locations, having restrictions, prohibitions or the like. Reminding you, so bylaw requires a nuisance to be demonstrated and for that to be based in evidence, and it has to be for matters that affect public safety and health. The Freedom Camping Act 2011 sets tests for the creation of a freedom camping bylaw. In short, you need to be satisfied that a problem exists and that a bylaw is an appropriate and proportional response to it. Also noting, as we've discussed previously, that a bylaw cannot be used as a revenue-generating mechanism. In fact, to quote Paul Cooper, one of his favourite quotes to me is that we normally lose money with bylaws. So just noting that within that context. On the 1st of April, you resolved to proceed with a public survey and for us to continue looking at what a draft bylaw might look like. And so we undertook a public survey between the 10th and the 30th of April. We advertised that through our normal means. And the purpose of this workshop is to present you with those responses, what we've heard, and some of our initial officer commenting, noting that we've had about 2 or 3 working days to look at it since it closed, and then also see what your initial responses are to that to help guide us in preparing what you've asked us to prepare for you for currently the end of June council meeting. Perfect. I'll dive into it. Please interrupt me at any point if there are any questions. So the first part is those survey responses. Just noting that due to the deadline for getting this workshop material in, what I'm going to present to you incorporates most but not all of the workshop responses. So there's just a little caveat there. So when we pulled the data for this workshop, we'd heard from 92 people, and in total we ended up hearing from 103. So 97 of them responded to the online form and 6 sent in emails. You've separately got those attachments, that 500-word document that I certainly didn't expect you to read, but we may refer to depending on how the conversation goes over the next little while. So this slide breaks down who we heard from, and this is useful to understand. Did we hear from residents and ratepayers within the district? by and large, yes, they were the largest majority of people that we heard from, but we also heard from people who lived elsewhere in New Zealand, and a decent number of those were people within Canterbury. So that helps you understand who you've heard from, helps you apportion weight, shall we say, to various different responses. And as you'll see in some of the subsequent slides, we've broken down the responses based on whether they self-reported living in the district or not. One quick comment, I suppose, on 103 responses. Is that good? Is that bad? Is that indifferent? It is worth noting, I suppose, that if we didn't hear from someone, does that mean that they weren't aware of it, that they weren't interested, that they're comfortable with the status quo? That's something to inject into your thinking, I suppose. But 103 responses in general is a sizable sample for us to be able to have some confidence around what they're telling us. We asked them a wide range of questions, about 20 or so. These slides just pick a few of them out for us to highlight and dive into a bit deeper. So the first part of the survey asked them, yes, about their details, but then also what they saw in terms of the benefits of freedom camping. And so by and large, people were talking about the ability to travel to wide ranges of areas, be able to more easily access different areas that they wouldn't otherwise be able to if they were located at fixed paid campsites and things like that. And then we asked them about issues that they've experienced. And we aligned this question with the tests that are in the legislation for whether or not a bylaw might be appropriate. And so that's whether there's a negative impact on the physical area and environment, negative impact on the health and safety of people visiting the area, and negative impact on public access, so others using the area. Of the 92 responses that we pulled for the survey, 46 responded to this question. The questions were optional. So presumably that means that roughly half the people that responded to the survey hadn't experienced any of these issues. I'm not going to break down the percentages by each unless you've got questions as to what they'll mean, because I can appreciate it's a lot of text on a page. But I will just simply note, so of those 46 responses, 20 people said that they'd experienced some issues with Arundel Bridge, 34 for Caroline Bay, 14 for Milford Lagoon, 12 for O'Neill's, 18 for Te Moana, 13 for Waitohi Bush, 17 from Winchester Bridge, and 12 said that they'd experienced them in other sites, most prominently West End Park, residential areas, South Beach, and the Timaru Library car park. We'll just pause, see if there are any questions about interpreting that page. Otherwise, I'll just go through some of the high-level themes that I picked out when reading through the responses for each of those.
Blue good and red bad. Is blue good and red is bad?
So how Microsoft Forms has portrayed this is that's not the case. Basically, we're aligning the colours with the key that's above. So for Arundel Bridge, for instance, the blue is saying that the majority of people experienced all three of those issues: negative impact on the physical area / environment, health and safety, public access. So where you've got the percentages to the right, so 26.3 aligns with 1, 5.3 aligns with 2, 5.3 for 3, and so on and so forth until you get to 57.9 at the end. I appreciate that the way that the form has presented that can be a little bit confusing, but just due to time, we screenshotted that off the form itself. Yeah. Hopefully that answers your question, Councillor Bruce. So just quickly, in terms of Arundel Bridge, the main issues that people noted were things such as overcrowding, release of grey water, vandalism, dogs off leash, human waste, and washing dishes in rivers, impacting access. In terms of Caroline Bay, where we got the most responses, probably not surprisingly, people referred to overcrowding, specifically at the time of the carnival, damage to grass, dogs off leash, impact of access given the number of people and how they'd set themselves up, impact on those using adjacent areas. No one that I could tell in my reading of the data gave any site-specific information for Milford Lagoon or O'Neill's. For Te Moana, people referred to fires, overcrowding, release of grey water, grass damaged by dirt bikes, individuals digging trenches, damaging that physical environment, and also witnessing the chopping down of trees for firewood. At Waitoi Bush, there was reference to human waste and people claiming to be self-contained but aren't. Again, nothing specific noted for Winchester Bridge or necessarily for those other sites. Just quickly, general non-site specific issues that people raised, so where they said we have seen X issue but didn't necessarily specify where. The biggest themes are around waste, the quantity and also the frequency, that whether they're emptied or not, human waste issues, areas not being large enough given the size of people or quantity of people using them, issues around whether or not people were having basically bogus plates for saying that they were self-contained or not, a perceived lack of enforcement, discharge of grey water or effluent, including from vehicles that were certified self-contained, so they're self-contained but they're not acting in a way that's consistent with being self-contained, and also the length of stay. Depending on guidance that we get from today, we'll go through before June and do individual site assessments, and I'll talk about that slightly later.
So a lot of that is around human waste and disposal of grey water. So what are our obligations when we have sites that are designated freedom camping? Do we have any obligations to have, not toilets, but them?
Andrew might be able to answer this better than me, but my understanding is that we have there's no legal obligation for us to have any facilities there. That is one reason, and people are currently able to certified self-contained freedom camp wherever they want in the district on public land, so long as there aren't other restrictions in place like reserves, and that the fact that there isn't the requirement for that sort of infrastructure to be in place is one reason that prompted the government 2 years ago to change it so that the national default rule was certified self-contained. Andrew, anything to add?
Yeah, basically, yeah, it is this whole self-contained, it is the criteria. But we do provide dump stations around the district, various places. We've got Caroline Bay, there's one in Geraldine, we're planning to put one in Pleasant Point. So the facilities are there. Yeah.
One question that we did ask people also, and I thought this was slightly telling and useful, is whether or not what they were telling us was new or not. You'll recall that we previously, in April, had presented you with about 46 or so inquiries over a couple of years, CRMs from members of the public with freedom camping issues. That's formed up our understanding of freedom camping to date and whatever issues might exist. So we said to people, what you're telling us, is that contained within those 46 responses? You've already complained to us about this and we can, understand, we know that we've already understood that, or is this new information to us? And a lot of people said, well, we haven't seen any issues, but a third of respondents said, we haven't reported any of this information to you previously. And that's useful for us to know and helps put the previous information that we've provided to you in better context. We asked people, we tried to educate people as best we could about what a bylaw may or may not be able to do, and we said to them, look, reflecting on the problems that you've stated, do you think that a bylaw might be useful? It was split exactly down the middle, basically. The vast majority of people responded to that, and around 40% of people said that they thought a bylaw would be useful, around 40% said no, and 19% of what 16 people said they were unsure. We broke that down into people that lived within the district. So in total of those 103 respondents, 56 said they lived within the district, and again it was split. 39% said yes to, they thought a bylaw might be useful, 39% said no, not useful, 14 responded unsure, and 7% did not respond at all to that. It's useful to get people's views on whether or not they think a bylaw may or may not be appropriate, but bearing in mind some of the key reasons that people said a bylaw may or may not be appropriate, isn't necessarily fully informed. So for example, some people said, yes, we should have a bylaw, it would give council a lot more power, which is true, but there's a legislative test to pass before we can get to that point. Some of the key themes I'll very quickly state of why people thought a bylaw may or may not be a good idea. So yes, people said things such as good to make expectations clear, give council greater authority or power, stop people, quote, staying as long as they like. Some people said, yes, have a bylaw so that we can make it more permissive than the current national default rule. For example, and this was a decently strong theme from the few people that stated it, allow non-self-contained vehicles to stay in areas where there are toilets, for instance, because currently, under the default national rule, they cannot. Or make it more permissive so that people with a portable toilet, not a fixed toilet, can camp. For those people that said no, they said either there are no issues that they've experienced. Some people felt that it would simply drive people into campgrounds and give them fewer options, or that they wouldn't come in at all. They felt like concentrating freedom camping in certain areas might make problems worse, and that it's better to be able to spread them out. Whether or not that occurs or not would also depend on how any bylaw, if it occurred, would be designed. They felt that a lack of a bylaw would entice more visitors. That's assuming that any bylaw would be more restrictive than the national default, I'm presuming. And also a decent theme was that the actions of what they perceived as a few shouldn't ruin it for the majority, sort of quoting there. Regardless of whether people said yes, no, or unsure, there was a strong theme, I felt, of if you're going to do something, enforce it, or enforce the current rules, and also that whatever occurs should have no or minimal cost to the ratepayers, so that beautiful chestnut that we always run into. Very briefly, just bringing this section towards an end, we asked people whether or not there were other areas for improvement, what they thought might best improve freedom camping in the district, or what they might have seen from elsewhere. There are very similar themes in this. So most people said things such as they would love more freedom camping areas, or more freedom camping encouraged areas, i.e. where we provide facilities. Again, people felt that there was a perceived lack of enforcement, and that more enforcement would be useful. They felt strongly that more education / making it easier for people to identify where they can and can't freedom camp, what the rules might be around dogs, etc., might be useful. A certain number of respondents wanted more investment in infrastructure, so for example, better sealed or draining areas for campers, more dump stations, things like that. Useful to throw into the mix as part of this conversation. One interesting aspect that I found when people talked about what they'd seen in other areas was that someone said that some other areas have donation systems. So for example, whilst people might still be able to freedom camp in areas, there's still the ability for them to, if they wish, make a donation to help upkeep the facilities, and that they said that a surprising number of people actually pay that. What that number looks like, I have no idea. I'm just going off what was in the responses, but I felt that that was something that's useful. Other suggestions were things such as that council should effectively get into running campgrounds, providing more facilities that we could charge, similar to how Waimate do with the lakes. Like I say, those two questions had very similar themes. Nearly at the end of this. We asked people, in addition to the benefits, the problems, the ideas that they had, etc., if there was to be a bylaw, what do they think that should look like? And that was mainly in three parts. What permitted freedom camping should be allowed? What sort of duration of stay could people have? And then should there be limits on users as well to prevent things such as overcrowding? So just like I did in the previous slide, I won't go through all of this because I know that there's a lot of data here, but suffice to say the majority of respondents that responded to this question, 86 out of the 92 at the point that the data was pulled, said that certified self-contained only would be their preference. That was a plurality. And then again, people are noted if there were, for example, toilets present, should that then mean that non-certified self-contained vehicles should be able to stay? There did seem to be a strong view that some sort of limit on stays would be appropriate. So 26%, about a quarter, said 1 to 2 nights would be reasonable. A plurality, 44%, 40 respondents said 3 to 5 nights would be good. From memory, our colleagues at Tararua District Council, who we have worked with and develop in our freedom camping work, because they're also doing something similar, and we based our survey off theirs, they had a similar response. Something like 4 to 6 nights was where they landed up in Tararua, for what it's worth. And then, again, a majority of people felt that there should be some limits on the number of people that might be able to use a particular space. Now, noting, we did say to people, if there was to be a bylaw, do you think there should be limits? That doesn't necessarily mean that people think we're saying, yes, there should be limits because there's currently a problem. Some people likely said, yes, there should be limits regardless of whether they felt a problem exists, and some people likely said no, as they didn't feel that a problem currently exists. So we have to sort of have that context with this information. Just pause at that point, see if there are any questions, and then otherwise I'll provide a little bit of a summation from me before diving into part 2 and welcoming Nigel up.
What was the mechanism by which the donations were made? Was it just a text number?
Yeah, most people, the couple of respondents that said that it was either a QR code, so if I recall that's similar to what we were doing down at Caroline Bay, although I think we're using a parking app for that. So there might be a similar mechanism for that, but it certainly was digitised. Also, some people referred to good old-fashioned honesty boxes. So, yeah, but maybe the digital route would be the way to look at, perhaps given the the admin involved, the logistics, etc. If that's something that you were to look at. And to be clear, that there are a bunch of, as I'm going to outline shortly, there are a bunch of tools that you can look at separate to a bylaw to address this. You don't need a bylaw to have a donation gathering mechanism and things like that. Any other questions?
Yeah, Brendan, probably one for Andrew, anyone listening online. We won't have freedom camping at Caroline Bay because we're now charging though, is that correct? Because it would be stupid to have a charge site and 50 metres away, you camp for free because I know where everyone will go.
So basically, yeah, any freedom camper parking in the car park of Caroline Bay, yeah, they have to pay if they are there for overnight purposes. So, yeah. But if they're on the street, then they don't have to pay.
Correct. And one thing that I found interesting when I was doing my research for this is there's some case law around that. So, for example, the courts have specifically said if you identify a particular problem in, I think they used the example of a beachhead, then you don't necessarily need evidence of a problem to expand any restrictions or prohibitions, if you have a bylaw, to adjacent urban areas because they understand that there's a displacement effect there. But yeah, as Andrew said, people could currently freedom camp on roads around Caroline Bay because we don't have a bylaw.
But my point is, once we have a bylaw, they won't be able to do that, correct? Because freedom camping would give specific areas.
Depending on how you design any bylaw that we might have, yes, you could, if you felt that there was sufficient evidence and it passed the necessary tests, you could put those restrictions saying, no freedom camping in, this geographic area, there's a map, etc., or only in this particular car park, etc.
Well, again, common sense, surely. We're not going to charge for the car park and less than 10 metres away on Marine Parade, you can park for free. Just doesn't make any sense and makes a joke of why we're even doing this, unless we actually do it properly.
The observations out there, people are in fact using the car park and they are paying. We're still receiving revenue, around about 6,000, 5,000, 6,000 a month at the moment. So it has been reasonably successful. I think generally freedom campers are, they like to follow the rules. They're not really out there to push the limits, and they want a safe space to actually park as well. And in a car park is much safer than on the road, to be honest.
I think the basis of a bylaw needs to be what problem are we trying to solve? And I'm not sure we know that. I'm not sure we know what problem we're trying to solve.
And that's it. Brendan, you'll jump into this, but it's been around giving the officers the tools, isn't it? And I think that was the large focus on it. It was giving the officers the tools to be able to deal with, some challenging people in these spaces to help move them on. It wasn't going to help on every occasion, but it did give them better tools than they've currently got it. And I think that was one of the large focuses, certainly from my point of view, I believe. But I'll let you jump in, keep us going.
No worries. Okay, so a little bit of a summary on that data then before we move on to the part two and the free format discussion. So from my perspective, reading those responses, it was useful to get that additional information, and it was a little bit surprising for me that the themes from the survey didn't align as closely to what we'd previously analysed through those CRM themes. For example, when we brought that April paper to you, there seemed to be a clear theme in those CRMs that people were concerned about where people were freedom camping and the length of time that they were freedom camping. Those themes didn't, at least to my reading, come through as strongly in this. What people were advising around the problem or problems, because they are multifaceted and they're not necessarily tidy to package up, but what people were complaining about were things that either we might be able to address, or a lot of what people were complaining about were things that we might be able to more readily address through either existing legislation or warranting people, officers under the Freedom Camping Act. And that may be certainly a useful start or an intermediary step, regardless of whether we go down the track of a bylaw or not. For my reading, it certainly, these responses certainly made a non-bylaw approach much more viable to address those problems than had been the case in that CRM data. So that's my assessment overall of where we landed with that. There certainly are people, don't get me wrong, who are raising issues with where some people are staying. We had some people say, look, we live in a beautiful district and these people are despoiling it, ban freedom camping entirely, for instance, which, by the way, by law we cannot do. We had some people say, look, these are certain areas that we shouldn't have freedom camping in, such as Caroline Bay. But the strongest themes that I found out of that survey were around issues that don't necessarily require a bylaw to address it. So I can talk through that a little bit more. We'll move now, if that's okay, to part two of the conversation. I note that I'm very nearly bang on time. This is a free format, and Nigel, please join us if you wish. This is free format. Basically, it's to enable us all to have a discussion around that data, to discuss where to from here, and the focus and questions that we've prepared for this. Number one is, Chief Executive said, are there problems? If so, what are those? Would you need a bylaw to address those? To me and Nigel's point, if the key thing that we're trying to do here is provide officers for tools, do we need a bylaw for that, or could we do that in other ways? One thing that might be useful for you to reflect on is, what is your vision for freedom camping in the district? So, for example, if we've got people saying they want to visit us but they're not certified self-contained, and that the current national rule, the status quo, prohibits them from doing that, is that something that you're happy with? Is that something that you wish might be amended? We can, if we get to that, if there was to be a bylaw, what sort of restrictions do you sense should be in place, and what sort of trade-offs in doing that would you be prepared to accept, or what are sort of non-negotiables? I've also got the Waitaki and Mackenzie District Council bylaws. We've worked with our colleagues there as well in sort of framing up some of this. And Nigel's here as well to provide a sort of an economic lens across the top of this. And so I'll let him speak in just a moment, but just noting, whilst the legislation, it doesn't provide for, shall I say, economic considerations to be part of this explicitly. The tests for whether or not we should have a freedom camping bylaw are around health and safety of people in public spaces, access to public spaces, damage to environment, etc. It is useful to be able to provide that wider lens over the top. So Nigel can help assist us with that. Sorry.
Just one other comment I'll make is, particularly regarding the CRMs and that, some of the issues have been around homeless people. and that this bylaw is not designed to deal with that issue. So that will still be in the background, regardless whether you have a bylaw or not.
My apologies. Nigel, is there anything you'd like to say in terms of comments, context from the Venture Timaru perspective before we dive into the discussion a bit more?
Thanks, Brendan. Good morning, Your Worship and elected members. Venture Timaru's position on this is we're very supportive of a thoughtfully designed and implemented bylaw. It's been spoken of providing officers with tools. From our perspective, it actually provides the users with clarity, a bit of structure around what's not so much what's permitted, but what works well and where. So we're seeing an increased number. Data is always a big thing when it comes to freedom camping. I think the last sort of data of any substance was back in sort of pre-COVID days. So the challenge is really around, well, not so challenge. I think the opportunity here with the bylaw is to provide that clarity, that structure to those that are looking to come and enjoy this great part of the country. The examples Brendan mentioned, Mackenzie, Waitaki, Whakatane has a good one as well. Queenstown's implemented one. So there are some really good examples out there, but again, you know, the term I use is a thoughtfully constructed bylaw that provides that clarity. It doesn't come in with a hammer, I think is the best way to put it. And I think the other thing too is that those users like the New Zealand Motor Caravan Association, Mana Whenua locally, DOC, etc., all need to be fully engaged with to provide that. So yeah, and I actually, personally, I quite like the term of the responsible camper bylaw as well. But yeah, freedom camping is a big part of our visitor sector, and I'm sure they would welcome talking to the New Zealand Motor Caravan Association and a few of the players in the space around data collection and charging, like the Camper Mates and the Pennies of this world, providing that clarity to our visitors as to how, where and why is really important, I think. So, thank you.
Thank you, Nigel. I should mention, by the way, we had a productive meeting, Bill and myself, with NZMCA last week. I can dive into that if you want. But for now, just opening up the floor in terms of discussion. In terms of what you've seen previously, in terms of that CRM data that we presented, in terms of the survey responses today, are we getting a sort of sense that you do have issues with the sorts of locations that people are staying and or how long they're staying for, and most importantly, how that's impacting either the environment, people's access to public spaces, or the health and safety of users? Those are the key legislative tests that need to be sort of at the front of your mind.
Regardless of where they're staying, they should be paying something. So can we change that name from freedom or something? Pay camping. Because whatever, whether they're self-contained or not, they're still doing whatever they're doing and leaving everything behind for us to sort out. And I think the New Zealand Motorhome Association should actually have a system in place whereby their members, when they park up, they have an app on their phone where they say where they are and they register, and a certain amount of money is sucked out of their account and put into the local authority's account to pay for whatever the cost of them being there. User pays.
I think you're missing the point, Alan. It's not those people that are wrecking it for everyone else. It's the ones that are in the little cars and have the potty in the back seat and all the rest of it. They're the ones that wreck it for everyone else. It's not the Motor Caravan Association people.
I realise we need something like this to regulate those 5% or the people, or probably even less than that abuse
the Motor Caravan Association won't have all those things already, apps and all the rest of it. So you're not preaching to the right people.
couple of comments on that. So freedom camping is by default, by definition, free and is, whether we like it or not, allowed by law. NZMCA, they do have around the country a number of, I'm not sure of the exact term that they use, but they're effectively park-over properties. There isn't one, I believe, in the Timaru district, but there are some in adjacent districts where effectively people, they can come, they park up there, and they pay, I think it's $5 per night per adult to use those facilities. There were a couple of survey respondents who said that we should work with NZMCA to have something similar within our district. So perhaps to your point, Councillor Booth, that might funnel freedom campers to that location rather than necessarily our council sites, presumably meaning that the cost to council is less for maintaining those other sites. We did, as you'd probably expect, have some other survey respondents who said, and these were campground owners and the like, who said that that would affect their business or wouldn't necessarily be desirable for the district for other reasons. So I inject those comments into the conversation.
Yes, because just thinking about the district plan, you know, there's that argument that the district plan shouldn't manage freedom camping and that the bylaw should. And so I think that's something for consideration too. And yeah, like lots of people have submitted on the district plan talking about that the district plan shouldn't be the manager of that. So I think that's where it sort of come from as well. Yeah.
Absolutely. I've spoken to Rachel downstairs and I think that they're proposing that the district plan explicitly says that any freedom camping within the district by the Freedom Camping Act and any subsequent regulation such as a bylaw or the infringements within the Act or any variation thereof. Otherwise, I think it probably gets quite messy if one is looking at which zone am I in, what permits, do I require a resource consent to camp here for 2 nights, you know, unlikely things such as that. Yeah.
I still haven't heard what problem we're trying to solve, because this is not about homeless people, so take that one away. This is not, you know, and homeless people parked in their cars, sleeping in their cars or whatever, so take that right away. This is not about revenue generating, because you can't, so take that one away. So then when you start unbundling all that, what problem exactly are we trying to solve? And that's what we've got to actually get to the nub of, so the bylaw, if we choose to have one, is meaningful. Because at the moment, it feels like we think we can generate money out of this. Well, actually, no. You can't.
So is that the other approach, instead of you take a similar approach to how we've managed Caroline Bay, which is generating through some of that analysis, there's requests for better suite of services and stuff, and do you flag the freedom camping bylaw and put an overnight charge aligned with Motor Caravan Association on some of these camps, which would still be, these areas which would still be cheaper, generate a revenue stream that can get tagged and put back into some of these facilities?
I would need to go away and do a little bit of work to see whether or not sincerely, to see whether or not what worked at Caroline Bay could work at other sites, if that's something that you're looking at. If your concern is that campers are effectively a cost to council and you're trying to recover that cost, because what happened down at Caroline Bay was that you used the parking bylaw. If, you know, at Arundel Bridge, for instance, if I recall correctly, there are not marked car parks, you know, and things like that. So can the parking bylaw be used for that? I doubt it, as my initial view. I will also just note, and I'm not sure whether or not this is able to be brought up onto the screen or something, sorry I didn't include it as one of the slides, but it's in the April Council report, and it talks about the infringements that are available under the Freedom Camping Act, and there is about a dozen of them, 3 of which, so this is in law at the moment, we could warrant someone against it. 3 of those dozen or so require us to have a bylaw, but the other 8 or 9 do not. For example, at the moment, if we had someone warranted under the Freedom Camping Act, which is a cost in and of itself to have that resource, and I can't speak to that, but if we had that in place, you know, someone who an officer deemed wasn't certified self-contained, they could be receive an infringement for that. Would that then mean that those sorts of people are less likely to visit the district, perhaps? Would it mean that if they're the sorts of ones who are causing these human waste problems, that seems to be a strong theme of the survey responses, and therefore that's less likely to be prevalent? Perhaps. There are a number of infringement opportunities that are laid out there, so that is an option available to council as well.
Yeah, there's also just noting there are actually other bylaws that can be used for the tools as well. They're the tools in the toolbox. And, you know, if there's litter complaints, we have litter bylaws. If there's dog complaints, we have dog bylaws. So, you know, there are tools there that we can use without a freedom camping bylaw.
And that's, to go back to my initial question before, the key distinction between all these other tools and a bylaw is that in a bylaw, you are affecting where people can and can't stay, how long how long they can stay there for, or how many people there, etc. But you know that needs to be distinguished quite clearly from any of these other sorts of issues. Yeah.
So we'll go right back to your original reason for a bylaw, and one of the principles was it has to be proportionate to the issue. So you can answer that question very simply for us, because and again, to our CEO's point there, is there an issue that requires us to be proportionate in having this bylaw? You've just given us another really, really good insight to the fact that if we warrant our officers, that they've got lots of tools in their toolbox there, plus the Freedom Camping Act, that gives them plenty of tools. And the other thing I ask is, when you do put a bylaw in place, isn't it true that there is a tenet there that says you must enforce your rules? So that when when Mr. Cooper said most bylaws cost us money, that's generally one of the reasons.
Absolutely. I mean, I suppose my short answer to that question is there are a number of tools in the toolbox. Based on the CRM data that we had a month ago, it seemed to me that people were complaining about sorts of things that would require a bylaw to address. Now that we've had the survey responses, a more representative sample perhaps, it seems to me that the strongest themes were things that probably could be met underneath existing tools or tools that we have available to us but we need to more proactively enforce or warrant someone against, etc. To the Chief Executive's point, what is the problem? There are a range of things and they're not tidily packaged up. That's part of the problem, that this sort of defies easy definition. You know, I could write you a few paragraphs, but you don't want me to do that for right now. I appreciate that. So,
Are they a significant problem? The answer is likely to be no. You know, that they are a nuisance, but they're a minor nuisance. Yeah.
It's minor, and we shouldn't be. Yeah, I mean, we all know that in Mackenzie it was massive, always has been, and they needed it.
Certainly didn't get the sense that people were banging down the door to respond to the survey and say we have all these problems and here are they, and you know, screeds and screeds of information. Yeah.
Just to clarify too, at the end of the day, if there are, as has been mentioned, other tools in the toolbox to provide from what I mentioned before around that structure and a bit of clarity to those coming into our district, then by all means. Ultimately, at the end of the day, it is providing that clarity around what, where, how to potentially prevent escalation of some of the minor issues to more major.
Councillor Pillin can just raise a point with the likes of the Tekapo map and their bylaw, that it's the marked areas effectively to control where they don't want people. So is the question, is that an issue for us and the likes of, let's just use Timor as an example, do we want to control people from certain areas and push them to other areas such as our overnight, controlled parking area to... It's about putting them to where they should be as opposed to where they're not. So is that of value? And my second question is, which I think I'd like you guys to go away, is there a general support for exploring whether we should be charging something for those spaces in line with Motor Caravan Association to generate revenue? Because it's still I mean, their rates are still cheap, and their members don't complain about them. So, if you look at the revenue that we're generating from Caroline Bay alone, actually, it's money that you can put back into those facilities. We don't have any money at all in our budgets for toilets currently. Maybe that's a way to generate revenue for toilets in those spaces. I'd be interested in if you could help us understand what the tools could be. I know that's all, go away and find out, yeah.
Absolutely. So noting that second point, we can go away and do some work on that. And on your first point in terms of, I suppose, that displacement effect, certainly through the survey, I didn't get a sense that people felt that that was necessarily an issue. Probably that came through most strongly at Caroline Bay, but say during the summertime when you'd expect it, when, people spill out into certain areas just depending on how busy that particular day is or how many people have stayed overnight and things like that. So certainly time specific, I would suggest.
So how do we deal with this issue? I get a complaint from someone saying, oh look, I've had a car outside my house, which is on the road reserve for the last 5 days. They're close to a park and they're using the toilet or what have you, but they're creating mess, there's litter, all those sort of things. What tools do you have there? Is it the litter? Is it the, if they've got, well, no, they're on the road reserve. But if you had a entire area marked off, then effectively your Freedom Bylaw Act bylaw would come into play, wouldn't it? So you could move people on saying there's no overnight camping.
I have a stab at that. Situation specific, but if you had a bylaw and that area was marked as no freedom camping at all, then yes, you could engage with that person. Alternatively, if you didn't have a bylaw, but we had staff warranted against the Freedom Camping Act and we had the default rule in place, then a staff member could go see if they were certified self-contained. If they were, then wouldn't have powers unless there were other issues, dogs, waste, litter, etc. But normally the conversation itself might prompt someone to move, who knows. If they were not certified self-contained, then a fine might be issued. However, if they were deemed, in the officer's opinion, to be homeless, and there's no clear guidance around this at the moment, even though we've asked MB and others for it, if they were deemed to be homeless, then they wouldn't be able to be infringed for the act of freedom camping itself. If there were other issues, dogs, waste, etc., they could be infringed on that. But if they were deemed to be homeless regardless, the normal approach is to then engage social agencies to work with that individual to see if they're able to arrange something better for them, basically. But that is, to some respects, outside of our control. That has been that whole issue around the interaction between any freedom camping regulations, legislation, and homeless. That's been a bone of contention for some councils. And there's certainly been some councils that have said, look, MSD aren't coming to the party here, we're not getting sort of what we want from them. My view on that would be that that's outside of our control and we probably shouldn't spend too much time focusing on that. The best thing we can do really is build good relationships between our staff and the relevant staff at MSD to mean that regardless of what resource they have, those sorts of conversations are most likely to be successful. Yeah. Does that answer your question? I hope so.
I love your direct approach to answering a question. Just you covered every base. Yeah, well done.
Very situation specific.
Yeah. One of the issues is the burden of proof as well when you're going out and enforcing a situation. Excuse me. It's demonstrating that they are actually living in there, even when they're parked on the road. Legally, they can be parked on the road, providing the vehicle is registered and warranted. But yeah, it's that burden of proof, and it can be quite difficult for an enforcement officer to actually demonstrate that.
My only question is that if we're going to start having bylaws around freedom camping, we're going to issue infringement notice, how confident are you that we're going to get the money back? Because I look at those people and I think they're transient, they've got no real fixed abode, they'll probably sell their car, head back to where they've come from, the fine won't get paid. So how confident are you that we're going to recoup the infringement notice money?
Again, sorry to sound like a broken record, it depends on the exact specifics, but what we've heard from other councils, because we've asked them the question, is they have had relatively high rates of compliance. The actual fines themselves, if it's under the Freedom Camping Act, are quite substantial anyway. Say $400 for freedom camping in an area in breach of a bylaw restriction. So I think if we were to do that and have that sort of pay for a resource to go around and enforce that, I think you'd probably build in some sort of percentage that you'd expect wouldn't be paid anyway. International tourists, because it's based on, the infringements are based on registration plates, if I understand correctly, and that goes straight to the rental company, the Juicies of this world. So they have been quicker than they have in the past to pass that on to those people. Otherwise, they're left holding the fine when that person's left the country. So there's an incentive built into the system there that they pay. In terms of transient or homeless people, etc., will they pay? Probably not. Will they then hang around? Probably not. Does that then mean we're shifting the problem somewhere else within the district or elsewhere? Potentially. Yeah, there's no tidy answer to that. Again, I hope that answers your question. We've certainly heard from other councils that, legitimate freedom campers have had, decent payment rates. Yeah.
The LPR, the licence plate recognition software that the likes of Campermate and these other ones utilise, do exactly what Brendan says. Recognises when they go in, when they go out. The charge goes straight back to the rental car company, and it's picked up on the way through. So the bulk of them are done that way. Doesn't take into account those others that.
I guess what I was kind of hoping the consideration of a bylaw might achieve, and I may be completely wrong here, but I've always thought that freedom campers were actually an opportunity along the economic development sort of line there, and this potentially would enable more control to have people coming to the right places, staying at the right places, encouraging the right habits, and also by having a bylaw that might be something that would stop people doing the behaviours that we don't want to see, because they just know that there is something in place for this. Because your freedom campers here, and I'm talking about your internationals more than anybody else, even if they are staying for free, they're still spending a little bit of money somewhere. And those are the same people, particularly the young ones that come here with only a couple of pennies to rub together. They're the ones we hope to impress to come back with their families and stay in our motels in the future and the like. So I was hoping that a bylaw might be able to create the right environment where good behaviour happens and people see the things we want them to see, and even the people that aren't self-contained, that do then have them go into the right places with the toilets and the likes, that it just enabled a degree of control, which is more than just what legislation provides. And if we have to first find a problem to offer a solution, rather than look ahead and think this could be a problem if we don't have the solution, can we not do it that way around?
Sorry, can I just add one bit to Councillor Shannon? You're quite right around the freedom camper at the front end about the 2 pennies to rub together. That will be, come back, encourage them back with their families, etc. The other end of it is the old grey nomads like yours truly, that, when they retire, they're in there, they're self-contained. That is a massive part of domestic tourism and, in fact, international tourism now. More willing, able out there, they're doing it, and big disposable incomes.
Can I make an observation? If every council had a bylaw for freedom camping, there'd be 72 of them. And if they're not consistent, I know if I went freedom camping, I wouldn't read a bylaw. I'd just simply get my caravan and park up and happy days. So unless they're consistent, and that's what I thought the Act did, the Act gave you the consistency to actually abide by, And the Act is, I think it's quite unique in some ways because it actually legitimises freedom camping. And unless your bylaws are actually consistent, they're going to be quite difficult. And if you do want a bylaw, then we really do need to look at Waitakis and Mackenzie's and go, would ours be different? Because, it's and even knowing whether something's self-contained, they have that blue or green sticker on them. That's meaningless because you can buy them on the net. Secondly, the majority of UK caravans are probably self-contained, except for when you go to get them certified, they take all the plumbing out and put an S-bend in them and charge you hundreds of dollars to do that. So a lot of people are just avoiding that now. So it's a tricky situation. It's really tricky.
I think, and there is a self-contained motor vehicle legislation bill too, so there's all of that. But I know, exactly. But I think what the bylaw does is it reflects local views and concerns. And I think that's the key, is the concerns. And we need to ask ourselves, do we have any concerns? Because the bylaw would help enforcement rules. So at the moment, the Freedom Camping Act is probably, it has mechanisms in for local authorities to enforce. So the bylaw is all about whether we have any concerns that we can localise. So that's the question, I suppose.
I think the other point to note is, under the Freedom Camping Act, we actually do have designated sites for freedom camping. We have that now. I mean, you'll see on your map there, the sites that are available. It's interesting to note that the CRM complaints actually don't relate to those sites very much at all. Where we've got people freedom camping in basically the town centres, in Temuka, in Timaru. That's where perhaps the issues are. But
And that's what the Tekapo one is dealing with having a map over their town centres.
yeah,
So that's what it's trying to achieve. And their other issue, the likes of Mackenzie, is not being able to charge for some of their areas. So they've dealt with the town issue, and maybe we don't have it to the same extent that they do. But so that gives you that tool. And then the other challenge that they have is they're not charging for those likes of, Pukeki, because they can't. There's some, challenge. But I think it's how do we optimise those revenue streams? So that's the question probably now for me. But I still think, there's, by putting our townships, restricting them for freedom camping, I think that makes sense. If you've got an issue in Temuka, I'd like us to just dial down and say, if we've got a specific issue, let's dial down to the complaints and understand what are the tools. Is this going to help or hinder? And then look at the revenue side off to this revenue stream off to the side.
Which specifically says you can't have a bylaw that is governed by the need to create revenue.
No, but they're two separate things. So the bylaw would cover the areas where you've got challenges, and then the others we're going to go out and spray some white lines so they're parking lots, so we can charge some revenue.
And I don't know whether that's permitted under the bylaw, to be clear. Cool. So I'm conscious of time, so just getting towards the end here, the way forward. So as per the April council meeting resolution, we were working towards getting, all the surveys, the proper officer commenting rather than just the initial stuff we've provided today, and, what a draft bylaw might look like for that June meeting. I'm also getting a sense that you want to look obviously at those other options, so we can go away and inject that into that report, I think, if you're comfortable with that, and give you a range of options to look at for that meeting. It won't be based on what I've heard today, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it wouldn't be a full draft bylaw, here's an option, press go on this, and then we can consult next week sort of thing. But it would be more high level, if we were to have a bylaw, this is what some of the high level details would be based on what you've provided today, what the concerns have been raised through the survey, the CRMs, etc.
And the scope of the bylaw.
Correct, yeah. Am I hearing that, interpreting that correctly?
I guess, Brendan, I don't want to put you to heaps and heaps of work, but if we Google the Mackenzie bylaw, you know, it's there. It shows it. It shows how they've excluded the whole of the township. And that's kind of what I thought we would be doing, taking out the CBD in Caroline Bay and saying that's an excluded area, and whatever was appropriate for Temuka and Geraldine and moving on. Because I don't want to tie up lots and lots of time, but if there's no appetite for it, let's let it go now.
Quick response to that, if we can get you a full draft bylaw in that time, given the other priorities going on, we will. My understanding is that there's quite a bit of work between the high-level scope of a bylaw and then also between that and then the actual writing of it. Yes, we've got templates online, we've got other councils to look at, but the legislation provides us with specific hurdles to jump through in terms of site assessments and risk analyses and things like that. That is, I think, the bit in between.
It's not like the chief executive, you just get the ticket off Timu or something.
I've just read both the
It would be
Waitaki.
easier, but unfortunately the legislation doesn't allow that, and we would be exposing ourselves to significant legal risk, I would suspect.
I think I go back to Councillor Scott's comment that it's addressing local issues, so you have to demonstrate what those local issues are, what those local nuisances you're trying to deal with.
We're just making a whole lot of work for ourselves, quite frankly. Just cut and paste someone else's and chuck our pictures in there. And let's do it.
Just a clarification, thanks Jess, I've got the date wrong, sorry, it's the 24th of June. I've given myself four more days there sneakily, because I don't think you're coming to a council meeting on a Saturday, sorry.
Brilliant. I think I think you've got some clear direction. It's all right. We can talk offline on a couple of things, and as it progresses, to see what options there are around the charging and stuff. Through the presentation, and then I'm sure we'll try and save questions for the end. Because I think one of these things, and it was raised with me after our workshop last week, that all on the water, and although some of us know content more than others, the great thing about these workshops is they're still being live streamed, and it's a great opportunity to educate the public as well. So I think it's important that we get through the entire workshop, and then we'll make sure we dive into any questions that we might have specifically. Thanks, Grant.
So thank you. So this workshop has come about, it was advised in the Actions Register in March, following, I believe, a Tenders and Procurement Committee this year. Wanted to know more about how the waste, the general waste sort of environment works within the Timaru District Council. So this is hopefully going to portray that. We initially were going apparently to a council meeting, so we've only included a very high level. It was a 30-minute presentation initially, and then last week we got bumped up to an hour. So hopefully we won't spend too much of time, but actually appreciate, excuse me, any questions as we go. It's probably an easier option. And with me, I've brought our team. So I've got, at the end, we've got Sachin, who's
basically our waste and assets and compliance technician. And next to is Justine, who is a data analyst. And in the world of waste, there are a lot of returns and the like that are having to be completed regularly and covering all sorts of facets. And that's the area that Justine is managing and also works with us, obviously, at our financial results. So that's just an overview of us. The first part, the first page, basically, we're covered very much by legislation and requirements, and in June last year, we completed our 4-yearly waste minimisation and management plan, which was signed off by Council, and in that we determine what our action plans are going to be for the year, but very much dictated by what the government waste strategy, and there's lots of acts involved, the Litter Act, the Waste Minimisation Act, so we have to follow and comply with what they require. So within that, sorry, I just got that one. That's basically how we determine how we operate. Just as an example, we report as do others in our Opal 3 reporting. We have significant goals that are imposed by government legislation through the MFE. We struggle to meet a lot of them, and we're upfront with that, and a lot of that's to do with the fact that Timaru District Council has had a very well-established waste system, especially with the 3-bin curbside operation since 2006, and therefore ahead of, in fact, just every other council at that stage. So we do struggle. So when the goals are set, they're actually set at a national level. They're not individualised. So we often incur our success actually can also lead to our failure, because we can't reach all of our goals, and we put that up front. But obviously we still try. We try in all sorts of areas. So that's what dictates how we operate. And if anyone's really keen to, we obviously have the plan available for you to read if you're looking for such. In 2021, the contract for the waste management operation within the Timaru District was put up for tender. It was previously managed by Waste Management Limited, but the tender this time was won by Environment New Zealand. Well, they weren't called Environment New Zealand, they're now just called Enviro NZ. And the contract itself, as it says there, 15 years plus a 5-year renewal. It's a significant contract. It's almost $80 million. And that gets paid, obviously, over the period of the contract. The contract also is subject to variations. Things can pop up. For example, it was determined initially when the contract was taken out that there was no allowance for at Pleasant Point, where they didn't have a weighbridge, they now do. There was no allowance for someone to manage that, so that's been included. We include variations for the likes of a lab technician. They have to do compliance recording and monitoring. So Sargent's involved in that, but in addition, that has to be done internally. And we also have events that occur that are outside of our, we can't mitigate against them. For example, last year, I think about September, we had 6 very significant nor'westerly winds, and they blew over some fences, which unfortunately allowed rubbish to escape from the tip face, and that we needed to get that retrieved as it was heading towards Saltwater Creek. So that we had to engage via our contractors. We had to engage people to actually do that clean-up. So those sort of things arise. So we don't have that fixed, this is the exact amount every month. It does vary. We obviously check all the variations to make sure that they have validity. And the next thing with the contract is that it's a shared contract, or common contract as they call it. So although we manage it, they're based in Timaru, Enviro NZ are also part of the Mackenzie and Waimeri District Council. We are a joint collaboration with the contract. We have governance meetings which are held quarterly so that we all have an opportunity to provide input into how it's going. Obviously, EnviroNZ are attended there. It's under the management of Andrew, who's listed as the engineer. And so that's all formalised and the like. And in addition to those quarterly meetings we have with Mackenzie and Waimati, we also have monthly meetings here with EnviroNZ. It involves the 5 or 6 of their senior staff and ourselves, an opportunity for any matters to get raised. And they go both ways. They have issues that they would like us to address, and we obviously have the same. So those are underway. Yep, there has been, and there's often talk about the fact that we take other materials into Redruth, and we do. But under the contract, there is an allowance that the EnviroNZ are allowed to operate a commercial arm, and so that is completely independent of the contract itself. The only the only caveat there is that if what they call the material recycle facility, the MRF, has a lot of materials there, the 3 councils do get absolute priority. So their commercial recycling arm has to basically take a back seat to us. So there is that priority, but they can operate and they can bring in materials, and as they do. As you're probably aware, there's I think Central Otago, Dunedin, and a bit of Ashburton as well. The Dunedin thing situation will obviously change in a year or so, because they have recently confirmed that they're going ahead with a major landfill similar to ours. I think it's going to be Class 1, is it, guys? Yeah. So they'll have a similar, so that means there'll be no need to transport. And I'd also imagine that Central Otago may find that a cheaper resource because of the transport costs and the like. So that's how the contract overall sort of is guided by us.
Grant, just one question on that, and it's more philosophical, I guess. Is it smart that we're allowing a private contractor to go all over the South Island and fill up our resources?
Yeah, I guess that's the point I was just going to make, is that any waste that's actually disposed of at Redruth is charged for at commercial rates. So we do make money out of that, and we will certainly recover our cost plus. I should probably be a better way of putting it. But the actual recyclables and that side, the sorting facility, the MRF, is actually owned by the contractor. So they can use that, it's their equipment, and they are responsible for finding markets for that material. So in getting additional councils or different areas, it creates a greater bulk and can actually advantage Timaru in the fact that we might get some better prices for our recyclable goods. So, likewise, the compost plant is also, new one is owned by the contractor, although that will be slowly given to us over the term of the contract. Yeah.
What sort of margin are you making on that product that's going into our landfill?
Sorry, I couldn't hear.
What margin are you making for offering that service to people such as from outside the district? I assume we're making money out of it. So are we charging them like a 50 or 100% on what our costs are? What are we doing?
The waste that's actually disposed of into the landfill is charged at the gate price, which is as of anybody. Yeah.
So it's charged in that we wouldn't know whether it's EnviroNZ or it could be Waste Management or Waste Away or Garbo. They could all bring it in, but they pay the same price. So we can't, even if we set, so in a way, as I said, the commercial contract, it's open for anyone. So although EnviroNZ have this opportunity, so does every other commercial contractor. So they bring waste in, and we don't know and don't actually ask where it comes from at present. That may change legislation-wise going forward. So effectively, they're not getting any discount on that. There's no discount. They pay the, as Andrew said, the gate rate, and that's in our fees and charges.
How do we come about that gate rate?
Calculations of the income that we're receiving. As you'll see later on when we go through this report, there's the calculation is that now we will get a return. We in the past, it looks, we haven't sometimes perhaps reached the amount that we're looking for. This year we're actually on track to certainly meet our budget and exceed it. And that's calculated on Because a lot of the gate rate's made up of things like there's the waste levy, we have carbon credits, there's all sorts of matters, and that starts at the base, and then we add on to where we try to arrive at a correct formula. And we had a couple of items last year which we're proposing to address this year with fees and charges where we weren't getting the correct rate, like what they call construction and demolition material, because we used to be able to stockpile it. We can't do that. We can't stockpile for 6 months, more than 6 months anymore, and so we now need to actually get the correct rate for that. So, and we're hoping to address that, so that will even be better this year going forward.
Yes, what I'm getting at is that we are obliged to provide those services at a cost basis to our ratepayers, to our own ratepayers. But that doesn't mean that we supply that same service at that same cost to outside users of that facility.
Yeah, it is a difficult one that our rates are fairly also benchmarked against our competitors. Yeah, where there are other landfills around, Cape Valley and Taiko in particular. So we have to be careful that we don't overcharge, but we do ensure that there's definitely cost recovery plus a small margin. But it is predominantly a cost recovery model at the moment. If we went to a full commercial operation, potentially that would change. Yeah.
Your data person could help me here with the reduction in the income from 2021, 22. It seems to be in line with the new contract coming into effect, and a halving of our income in that same period. Has that got anything to do with the fact that we actually relinquished the weighbridges or the data coming off those?
Sorry, I think you're referring to the rates income. A decision was made back then, prior to this team, to halve the rating income, my understanding was, Andrew, and recover the rest under general rates.
So
to halve the charges?
To the curbside rating.
Basically there was a decision was made when we let this new contract, and it was recognised that the landfill itself is a district-wide benefit and the curbside collection is basically user pays. It was proposed that the waste charge would cover the curbside collection, and then there would be a general rate to cover the landfill, given that it is a district-wide benefit. The rating system didn't handle that, and so therefore that general rate income was missed, and that's why we had that reduction. That has now been corrected, and we are truly recovering.
Thank you.
So a question from me, Andrew and Grant, along the same lines, and just thinking ahead, and it sort of ties to that question, are we putting enough margin in? What are we depreciating? And in 20 years' time, when we do need to, probably we need to be well into deciding on what our next landfill is going to be, will we have 50 million in the bank to pay for it? So if we don't, are we charging enough now? And should, to Alan's point, be we're charging more to put money aside for that fund?
Yeah, I think we're not actually recovering enough to build a new landfill. Yeah, and that's probably the short answer. We're recovering enough to cover our costs, to cover the aftercare of the existing landfill, but certainly not develop a new one. So that would come through, and that would really be a cost on the future ratepayers, because they're going to get the benefit of it. I don't think today's ratepayers should be paying for that.
I just don't think we can have I take your point, but I just don't think we can have the view that we loan fund absolutely everything we do. At some point in time, it would be great to have some money put aside, because I don't think that's how we've necessarily got to where we are today. So maybe it's a bit of a... but I think from here there's a further action to understand the numbers for 20 years' time, and let's have a paper at some point, a little bit of work, maybe it's later in the year, feeding into next year's annual plan around how we how do we?
Yeah, one of the, and it's probably a pie in the sky, but one of the goals of the New Zealand waste strategy is that by 2050 there'll be no landfills. Now, we'll sit here and probably have doubt about that, but that's actually one of their stated goals. So
we'll just
zero,
do
zero
nothing.
waste, yeah. So whether that means
25 years,
other
if we
facilities such as the one that was proposed down south, who knows? So yeah, but we do have to account. We certainly don't have enough at the moment to cover that. Yeah.
Oh, so that's easy. We'll just do that.
I certainly, I take your note there, about the future. We've still got 27 years life in the current landfill. So yeah, and maybe we do need to look at our pricing model, and that's something that will have to be considered a part of the next LTP.
Just on this slide here, you said the material facility was owned by Enviro NZ. So do they pay us a lease of the building, or is that reflected in the contract? How do we recover the depreciation and interest costs on?
So we own the building and they own the plant. They don't pay a lease as such. It's all part of the agreed contract. So they own the actual internal facility.
So, but we're still allowing for the interest cost and the depreciation on that building in our financials to reflect that cost?
Yes, we are, yeah.
I've just got a quick question. The waste levy of $17.75, is that based on size, like cubic metre of the rubbish, or is it based on the weight as far as that levy's calculated?
At the curbside pickup, yep. So it was based on total tonnage of curbside. It's quite hard to sort of differentiate between the large bins and the standard bins, but majority of bins in Timaru, the rubbish bins, are the smaller size.
Do you charge for the use of the weighbridges for external people that use them?
Sorry, how do you mean the charge for the weighbridge?
Which is generate a lot of money. Generally, you pay per weight, obviously, or you pay to weigh. And generally, for outside people coming in and say utilising our facility, every time they go away across the weighbridge, they should be getting charged probably $20 to $25 per weigh. Is there any sort of a recovery in regards to that from external users?
There is a public weigh where if they want just a weigh, they get charged. But the actual cost of the whole operations, including the operations of the weighbridge, etc., is included in that fees and charges, in those fees and charges.
And they have a minimum charge. If you take a trailer over, there's a minimum charge, whatever it may be, depending on the type of material.
Need to do that because you need to know how much to charge them, don't you?
Right, so the...
Sorry, Garrett, just one more general question to Andrew. We've got 25 years left in where we are at the moment. Have we done anything actively to find out where we'll go and move it to? Because land will never be cheaper than it is now. So is that actively done, or do we just worry about that 5 years out?
We haven't actively done anything at this point in time. There's been some general discussion over where we should go. We could transport our waste all to Cape Valley, for instance, and get out of the business of landfills altogether. There's the Taiko landfill, effectively, if they can become a Class 1 landfill. They're only Class 2 at the moment, but there's potential there. There could be an incinerator come to town or around there, which could change the game. So we're trying not to plan too far in advance, but we won't be leaving it to the last 5 years. No, we're probably more like 10 years to plan that out. But buying up land is significant investment, and then, is it going to be suitable for a landfill? Are you going to get the consents? So, should it be a private operator? Should it be even council's responsibility?
Who analyses all the numbers and makes sure the numbers are correct? Is that done in your office, Andrew, or is that done in your department? So
in regards to all of the weighbridge tonnage, so we have to report monthly to MFE to do what's called a waste return. We have to report on all material that comes across, so that's why everything is weighed. We have to report on the diverted materials. We have to report on the stuff coming in to the transfer stations and things like that. So that's all driven by the Weighbridge software. So once a month that's all downloaded and it's run through several spreadsheets, etc., to get all of that information.
I guess I was getting at the financials, who actually oversees the financials to ensure that you are charging the appropriate amount for the service being provided, and, you know, similar to a profit and loss centre.
Yeah, well, the Weighbridge data is owned by us, so if we know what's going over the Weighbridge, we know how much is charged, and so...
I asked, the overall financials of your whole waste operation.
Yeah, that's based on the budget, and it is based on a cost recovery process. We're not... It's not
Is that done? Is it
model.
done in your department, Andrew, or is it done somewhere else?
No, it's done by us, yeah. And said, well, it's done by our finance team, and yeah, it's all part of the council's budget, yeah.
And the finance team is all over all those numbers and can tell us exactly what's going on.
Yeah, but it's presented as a part of the monthly reports on where, yeah, how much revenue we've gained, what our costs are, and it's all in there.
So with the assets, the waste, there are significant assets, as we said in our slides, and we talked there about the facility itself, the MRF, the building, kiosks, the crow's nest. Plant machinery, we installed, and we'll talk about that later, a gas flare last year. It was up and operating, and that's obviously was a significant investment, and hopefully we'll have a significant return. We've got compactor bins and hooker bins, and just for an example, these go at about $60,000 to $80,000 each. Some of them are getting towards the end of life, and we're trying to work out our asset management register is and looking to replace those that are required, but also at the same time we're evaluating whether we need to replace. We have compactors at Geraldine and at Temuka, which were previously located down at Redruth. When Redruth was upgraded, they put a new compactor there. You can see the photo there. And the compactors were sent to Geraldine and Temuka, but really we may not need to replace them because they're very expensive items, over $200K to replace. We could potentially just have the transfer stations receive the materials and bring them in to Redruth. But we would consider that as each item comes up. We have had to replace a weighbridge last year. That's something we can't do without, and that was an unforeseen expense that it just stopped working basically, and obviously with the returns we have to do, that's a priority. As I said before, the 3 transfer stations now all have weighbridges. Pleasant Point didn't originally. We're one of only 3 Class 1 council-owned landfills in the South Island, and as Andrew mentioned, one of the other considerations going forward is, do we still want to be involved in the Class 1 landfill position? And that's something that we will have to keep an eye on, because Cape Valley obviously is a significant investment. It is likely that if we did want to continue, that we certainly wouldn't be in an area that we, if we got consents, that we are now, because of the proximity to the likes of Saltwater Creek. Although we're close to the ocean, there is as we've said later, there is a 100-year relief from that situation of inundation from the ocean. So Saltwater Creek creates an issue. So I know that that's the sort of areas that we need to consider.
Just move forward.
Sorry?
Move forward on the screen.
Oh, right, sorry. One thing, this photo up here, so is the new cell which has just been created, the bottom picture. So that's taken very recently. As you can see, it's already starting to fill up. And above that, you've got the new organics facility, which opened in November. It's been very well received. We've had a number of visitors come down and from MFE as well, and they are very impressed with the facility. And next to that, you can see the previous landfill dump site is now being capped. That photo was taken about 3 months ago. Since then, the you wouldn't recognise it. The grass strike is basically, it's taken off, and it now looks like a nice green rolling meadow. So that, just aesthetically, it helps look. The next slide is prior to the previous one, because you'll see that cell 3.5 there, it hasn't been, that was March 24, just before the excavation began. And that's there, we've got another 5 cells that can be used, taking us through to approximately 2050. But as we know, that this is very much a very moving target, and we have to maintain a watch on that.
Well, Grant, can I ask a question to that?
Mm-hmm.
Because obviously we receive waste from Waimate and Mackenzie and places like that. So do we actually make money off that? And I hope the answer is yes, by the way. But also, like, does consideration come at some point that we say we just need to look after our own district because of our ageing or stress on our landfill cells? Like, is that?
It does. Look, we do make money because they pay for waste levy across the weighbridge. Yeah, so that, yeah.
I believe that currently, previously we have had budget issues, but this year we are on top of that.
I would challenge that, because we're pretty much, in the scheme of things, in materiality, in a break-even position on budget, on waste minimisation according to our budget. Like, the budget's showing we budget to make 116,000. In the scheme of council, that's not very much. And so breaking even's not making money. So I'm still concerned that we keep hearing we're making money out of these other councils, but this workshop hasn't shown us how. Like, what do we receive? Do we just get the weighbridge income off them? And if so, how many tonnes is that? How fast are they filling up our landfill for us? Are they contributing to the replacement of the landfill? No. And then you talked about the shared contract, but how does that work? So the 80 million, is that just our share, or do we recover the costs? I'm still confused about how the contract works with the other councils and how we supposedly make money out of them.
Yeah, it's okay. But as far as Mackenzie and Waimate are concerned, they have separate contracts. It is a common contract in the way it's written, but it is basically separate. Their waste and recyclables and organics will come down to Redruth as part of that deal, but we charge them commercial rates for anything that's disposed of in the landfill. So there's no, I guess, favours for them. They don't get a discount at any stage just because they're with Mackenzie Waimate, our neighbours, so they're paying the full commercial. And I have to agree with you, we are still on, I guess, a cost recovery model. We're not making a huge surplus on landfilling. We could look at changing that, and it certainly has, but we're also conscious of what other landfills charge. It is a competitive business, and we could actually lose a lot of waste if we upped our charges too high. The likes of other commercial operators like Waste Management say, right, we're going to take our refuse to Tyco, or we're going to take ours to Cape Valley. And when we suddenly in a loss of situation because we're not getting the tonnages through the gate as much as we planned. So it's a commercial situation, and we have to be competitive when you're dealing with that commercial customers.
Well, is only when you're making money. If we're not making money, it's not commercial.
No, we're making a small amount. We're making a small surplus, yeah.
Now, but I don't believe we have until, well, we haven't seen what this year's results are going to be, but the budget is to make money. But in the past, I think we've lost money time and time again.
In the past, and that's because of the rating, we weren't recovering enough through our rating. That's been corrected for this financial year now. So what we show, we're running at around $2 million over, aren't we, at the moment? So surplus is our year to date.
And my other question is, what do those councils contribute to our contamination rates? And what kind of measures and accountability do we have over that? Because I've been in the Mackenzie country and they just chuck everything in a skip at campground, and it horrifies me.
So just just in regards to contamination, the contractor actually pays the contamination. So they're responsible for paying the contamination. So, yeah.
Reflect in our reporting targets and things like that, wouldn't it?
No, we're reporting just on our waste now. The previous reporting, we used to do it as an overall, but we've realised that we were being disadvantaged there. So we do samples from just our own waste collections, and that is the contamination rate. That is actually reported. But having said that, the likes of Ashburton have a far lower contamination rate than we do, so that actually in some ways helps.
Still a concern if we're filling up our landfill with their waste that is contaminated with recyclables and things like that don't need to go into that land waste.
Yeah, but we are charging for that.
And there is still that I'm not hearing that this premium has been addressed in terms of the opportunity cost of the extra years that we would otherwise gain from not taking their waste. So for example, the actual lifespan was to 2060. There is a massive premium for that 10 years, for example, that isn't addressed in that recovery in terms of what we would otherwise have to invest in more landfill ourselves. And noting earlier you're saying that the national goal is no landfill by 2050. Yeah, no. So it's going to be, let's say it's going to be 2060. We need, for example, this to last till 2060. So there is a premium attached to that, and our neighbouring councils aren't helping us to address that.
I certainly hear you, yeah, and I'll take note of that, and we'll look at, what other models we can employ and look at those, those costs. The opportunity cost is a, very important point.
So the biggest risk to council is we are taking on all the risk of that site. So the site's near the sea, the site's near Saltwater Creek. If for some reason something happens, it's on this council. It's not on anyone else. So effectively, by accepting other waste and filling that up, we're taking a bigger risk. Could you imagine if we had to do a Peel Forest down there? Anyway, it's something that we've got to think hard about. And I think that risk gets forgotten about.
Yes, and my follow-on question to that is the only benefit to taking other people's waste if it offset our own ratepayers, and I don't think that is happening. Our ratepayers are not seeing the benefits of taking other people's waste. Do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a fair comment. But we also, this is one of only 3 Class 1 landfills in the South Island. So, do you just say to Mackenzie and Waimasie, sorry, we're not going to take your waste, you're going to have to transport it to Cape Valley would be the nearest one they could go to. That would be a huge cost to their ratepayers. I don't know. Well, this is a collaboration thing.
Well,
this is the South Canterbury.
We need to pay. They need to pay more.
Yeah,
we wouldn't. They just need to pay more.
Yeah.
They don't want to join us in water, so why would we take their waste, Andrew?
That's a very good point.
Subsidise them.
Sorry, hold on. Mackenzie have voted today to...
Our southern neighbours, sorry.
Southern neighbours, yeah.
But just interestingly, our grandchildren will look back and say, what idiots, putting waste in next to the sea, knowing it's coming, albeit in 100 years. So my challenge to you, Andrew, is find another site and work out, the cost. And have we worked out the cost if we were to actually do the environmentally right thing, as per the CEs, and close it and send our waste to Cape Valley? I mean, we keep doing these things, and Pete's saying no, but we haven't seen the numbers, We just don't know what the costs are. I know they will be more, but, that's a choice as well, isn't it? Because take Peel Forest, the river came up, how many million are we in for? Suddenly there's a tsunami, I don't know. It just seems to me we're reactive rather than proactive.
So if we get this right, we almost need that waste to make the operation viable. Is that what we're saying? Because otherwise we would be looking at disincentivising those particular people, councils and commercial, to go to Tyco. That way we've got the ability to know and understand that our cell's not going to be filled up that quick, so that gives us a lot of room in terms of having to afford, because we have no leg room in there at all for the cost of a cell going forward by future ratepayers.
Yeah, I go back to that point, we're in a competitive environment. There is other facilities that are charging, and if we put our charges up too high, you'll lose those, you'll lose your customers, you'll lose that revenue coming in. So it is a delicate balance here. We do have to recover our costs, there's no doubt about that. We cannot, that's our ultimate bottom line. We've allowed for a small surplus as well, as a bit of a buffer. But if we want to go to a commercial model, we could certainly look at that. And I think but we said just got to be conscious of that overall pricing.
I think what we need to be doing for this workshop is breaking down the cost into its components. So we have a charge for the pickup of the waste, and that charge is for ratepayers. And then there's the next part is getting it over the weighbridge, and then maintaining that site. And I think you've got to split all those up, because when you get down back to basics, having the waste picked up by a contractor and taken somewhere else may not be a lot different than us managing a big site. So we just need to think that through. And it appears to me there is one entity making money, and that needs to be thought about as well.
Yeah, so can I suggest we move on, because we do have a lot of that financial information further on in the presentation.
So the next slide was on the waste levy, and that was basically an update from the paper we presented in September. And just as an update there, the waste levy currently at $60 per tonne goes to $65 1 July, I think. Yeah, okay.
Just on that, did we hear something recently that the government are proposing to change how they redistribute that waste levy? And what will that mean for us?
That they are looking at options, and there's a paper being drafted at the moment. We don't know what it would exactly mean to us, because they don't know the final makeup of what. It's a concern if they did change significantly for us, for sure. And at the moment, we're part of the Canterbury Joint Waste Committee, and that obviously all Canterbury councils, and they employ, or we also pay towards a facilitator, and they're preparing a statement to actually support the feeling of the Canterbury, and of course they have Cape Valley, so they're significantly impacted here in the Christchurch, in the main Christchurch area. We're getting our own sort of thoughts together, which we'll then run past probably the chair infrastructure, and then we'll contribute those towards the Canterbury one. But I think we're on the same wavelength, and that you did right, and it is a concern if they removed potentially what they're proposing. It's very hard to speak exactly what they will do. At the moment, it certainly benefits us with that waste levy coming back, because it supports, as we've said in here, significant investment that we have with the educators and with the likes of Sustainable South Canterbury Trust and that. So yeah, so that's a matter that's very much. So those submissions close 1 June, so it's pretty close. Oops, sorry, went one forward. So the next slide just talks generally about our financials and the income and how we've received that. Our targeted rates, and this is the slide that perhaps refers to what was being talked about before, when in 2021 there was an adjustment made which didn't work. And now we're back at the stage where we're actually receiving the income that's required from targeted rates to cover the curbside costs. So this is the first year this has actually been achieved, and so going forward we're now hoping that now that the model is set so that we actually do recover those costs. Beforehand, they were just going out the back door, that we can now actually be in a stable financial position and actually going forward have a base and know how to assess where we're at.
Just on the transfer station and landfill income, is that purely weighbridge or do we get other income?
So that is our actual net income. So it's the income from the weighbridge, and there is the adjustment taken out for the waste levy, because we collect the waste levy, we pay the waste levy. Yes, yep, the 7.6, sorry. That is just the targeted rates, the 7.6. We were in the red, so we were completely in the red for those 2 years. The expenses were a lot higher than the income, so.
Yes, there was an attempt to recover that through additional weighbridge charges.
So what's the greatest risk down there? Like, we've got the number right now, or we think we have. Is there any obvious risk that you can think of that might reduce that income next year?
Tyco's obviously a risk. At the same time, it's almost also has a bit of an olive branch effect as well, because it will potentially, because they take what they call Class 2 construction, demolition material, asbestos and the like. So, and we're at the moment, we're cheaper than them, but we're probably going to be roughly at the same pricing going forward, because we've had to increase our construction demolition proposed charges, because we were actually paying to have materials come in. So there are certainly a risk, but at the same time, as I said, because if material does go their way, then that extends our lifespan. So it's very much a balancing act and trying to just to manage that. So we believe that we can be complementary with Tyco, even though they are a risk to our actual income. But the thing is that the income we're receiving going forward, we've calculated, it will enable us to actually be at least level and potentially make a profit as well. So we're not going to be where the position where we are currently. We're actually losing on two particular line items, which we won't be in our proposed rates going forward.
I think that you made a comment that you were paying for demolition stuff to go into your dump. Did you say that? No?
What is?
Sorry, yep. So, yeah, you're referring to the hard fill and things like that. So we can actually use that as diverted materials. However, we can only, rules from MFE regarding diverted materials is you can only stockpile for so long. So that material was being stockpiled because we were going to use it on levelling the stage one, etc. Because we couldn't, there was nothing in the budget to start that project. We put it off, so we had to stop diverting it. So it attracts waste levy and it attracts carbon credits.
We were paying to have that delivered? No.
No, when Grant says we were paying for it, it basically means we were not covering a cost we were not recovering enough to pay waste levy and carbon credits.
But the new proposal, we will cover that.
Grant, you said Tyco is a risk and you alluded to them being an opportunity. Are we proactively exploring the opportunities with Tyco? Because it feels to me like there are some massive opportunities there for both us and Tyco, and I don't want to just leave them to fate.
I have very close contact with Gary. Yeah.
Yeah, we're hoping.
And actively exploring opportunities, or just
very much complementary. Yes, we are.
Yeah. Opportunity. I think we see Tyco as definitely complementary to us, and that if they can take a lot of the demolition waste, because that just uses up a lot of our landfill space, it's class 2 material. It doesn't have to go into a class 1 landfill. So, yeah, and it will extend the life of our landfill.
One of the really frustrating things of being a new councillor is this, because I feel like Councillor Pye, well, this is her, she's become the waste lady. We've got bloody cones over there, and she's a waste anyway. She's so, but I think the same question, I think, for the last 2 years have been asked, you know, where are we making money? We can only see losses, and now we're finally coming out of that fog and going, yeah, okay, we didn't get it right, and now we are. And I feel like Councillor Pye is lucky that she stayed so connected to it, because I gave up ages ago. Honestly, I just thought, what the hell? This doesn't even make sense. So I think it's great that there's a step forward, but I think we've got so much more we can do. Yeah.
The waste management income from rates. So as the chart talks about there, we've tried to basically break up where the standard sets come from. And just a couple of notes at the bottom there, so potentially 7.7 million income. And we've noticed that it says there that so residents can determine if they want to upsize their bins. And of course, in the last year, with the changes made in 2024, where a number of items could no longer go into the green bin, predominantly the likes of tissues and the like, we've had an increase in the number of red bin upgrades. So we do charge accordingly for that, so they don't just get a bigger red bin, they pay for it. And just as a note there, that 43% of additional bins basically are located within the commercial premises, businesses throughout the area.
So basically every year everybody's charged for a standard set, and then if they want extra bins, we offer that at a premium. I guess one of the comments I'll make there is in regard to commercial, because commercial customers, 43% of the additional bins are allocated to them. Is that a business that council should be in? You know, that is commercial waste effectively. Now, we've been in that business for a long time now, but it's something to consider if you really do want to be in that. You know, should that be private operators dealing with that waste?
Can you explain that a wee bit more, Andrew? Because obviously it'll end up still in our facility, but you're saying someone else should go around and pick it up and deal with it and supply the bins. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's what I'm saying. You know, we supply a commercial premises just like any other residential customer, a set of bins. But if they've got waste or generating waste far in excess of that, well, then that should be dealt with in a commercial manner by commercial operators.
Is that an option to those businesses? There's nothing to stop that business getting a quote from a different provider, isn't there, at the moment?
No.
They don't have to use council services, do they?
That is correct, yes, but I guess we're very competitive. That's what I'll say. Yeah.
So Andrew...
Just on that, when you said they don't have to, the rating model is compulsory, one bin set per premises.
So there's about 25 bin sets, 25,000 bin sets out there. So the average cost, if you're generating revenue of 7.7 million, the average cost per bin is $311 for the entire year. You divide that by 52, it's cheap as chips.
It is. It is extremely competitive.
Extremely conflicted because we've got about 16 bins, but I think the reason for it was at the time actually there wasn't recycling opportunities through commercial, and there is now. So those options are there, but I think what you could at the very least look at is, does commercial have a different tier, and can you have two rates? So you have your domestic rate for an extra bin, and then you have a commercial rate for an extra bin. That would be another option of looking at it. But I agree, it should be looked at.
Just got one quick question.
Yeah, Gavin.
I'm just looking at the cost of the 3 bin systems. We take Mackenzie's rubbish, don't we?
Yes.
Yeah. So they're paying $370 a year, and we're paying $378 a year as ratepayers. So what are they getting less that they can charge less. I guess is where I'm coming from.
Slightly different bins. Yeah. So that's probably the easiest. Yeah, so they've got a tiny little glass bin. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so, yeah, not quite apples. Yeah. So if you own property in the Mackenzie, drink cans.
Well, obviously an extra charge in getting it to here as well.
Yeah.
So
totally.
surely that must can't subsidise all that.
Yeah, I think there's
You've
an
got to get the
opportunity
rubbish
to
from
do-
Mackenzie to Timaru.
We'll do some financial analysis across those couple of streams. Right, keep us going, team, and we'll try and...
Right, so the next graph just talks about the financial expenses and showed how the breakup was shown, so it's there and to be read. And then we went on to what do my rates pay for. So we've tried to break down there the bins and the costs associated with each. So, and as you can see, there's the pickup fees, landfill, carbon credits, and then there's general operational costs, and that's basically when it gets back to the landfill. 85,000 bins throughout the district, so it's a significant amount. And the bin numbers are listed there. It also just talks about the frequency of emptying, and just the other thing to note is that CBD ratepayers do get a weekly emptying of all bins, whereas those in the residential obviously have a fortnightly for some of their bins. Questions on that one?
Ted, one grant, and I get in the summer your green bins fill with grass. In winter, I've got to look deep down into my green bin to see if there's anything in there. Why wouldn't we, for the save of each lift, pick that up fortnightly rather than weekly? I know it was great when we started, but if you're actually trying to save money, is that an option?
No, unfortunately, because that's not how the rating works, is it, Justine? For the contract.
The contract, right? Yeah, the contractor is, it wouldn't make any difference to the contract costs.
But, people don't need to put out their green bin each time. So, they can hang on to it and not put it out. So,
Yeah, so I was like yourself. The contract isn't based on the lifts as I thought it would be. It's based on the actual number of bins out there.
Previously, we were being told each lift.
Well, maybe that was me and I apologise, but no, it's not. It's
Okay,
based on the
that
number of
makes
bins.
sense, because if it was per lift.
Yeah. Well, that was what I was encouraging, exactly the same sort of scenario.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
I wasn't quick enough on your last slide, but the depreciation and interest you've got in there of 715,000, is that just in relation to the curbside? Because that's way light compared to what we have in our budget, which is more like 1.5 and 700, it's over 2 million anyway.
Yeah, so that was based on actual figures versus budget. I don't know if Andrea's...
No, I still think they're way low. If you're talking about the entire depreciation and interest on the entire waste, it doesn't look right to me.
So my understanding is the interest costs have been a lot lower than what was budgeted as well.
So is that just year to date in that? Because our budget's still looking at 610 for depreciation and 1.7 for interest, but if you take off, we're about $1 million under that. It's still 610 and 700 is 1.5. It's not 700 interest and depreciation.
That was done that's a forecast done based on 9 months of actuals. So I believe it does show differently it'll be in the forecast that was recently done, March forecast.
I'm not convinced.
So that's something we'll certainly have a look at.
Yeah.
I've got a question, get myself in trouble here, but here we go. When you're looking at your rates for curbside collections are allocated to a variety of factors, that carbon credits cost the ratepayer more than the landfill fees, with the way that I read that. What benefit is the ratepayer getting for that, and how is that helping the environment?
Carbon credits is basically a tax. It's a government tax. there's no benefit to the ratepayer. Yeah, but it's a legislative requirement. Yeah.
Go back, you're right, it was year-to-date figures, but we've got something wrong in our budget because we can't be 225,000 of interest in our year-to-date compared to 1.2 million and go, that's because of lower interest rates.
Sorry, and then we have just a general overview of some points that we didn't include in much detail, and they're there to read. The other things I'd perhaps add in, as I talked about before, we are a member of the Canterbury Joint Waste Committee, which allows us to share ideas and we share costs there. We've obviously a member of a number of national committees, including what they call waste mins, which is not only just for TAs, it also includes professionals in the area, the likes of recycling firms, the likes of Paddle, Dallamore and Tonkin and Taylor, those sort of professionals as well. And of course there's stewardship schemes that are implemented on a regular basis. Some work, some don't, and very much dependent on markets that are available. And just recently, of course, they've had the tyre stewardship scheme, and that's proved so far very successful. The likes of, I think, almost 20 million tyres have been part of that scheme, so we're heavily invested in those sort of areas. Finally, in respect of this part, is the closed landfills. We have many in the area. There's both authorised, which there's 26 that we own, and there's those that have just appeared, the unofficial ones, and often these appeared in rural areas. Entrepreneurial locals would perhaps decide they didn't want to pay for dump fees, and they would create their own little areas, which then got covered up by material like weeds and bushes, and it only just being discovered as today. So we've got 26. We have engaged Paddle Dallamore to risk assess each of those, and we've got, I think, about 13 reports so far. The rest are due by the end of this financial year. They have tried to prioritise our highest risk ones first, so we're hoping the ones that come back later are minor in nature. The ones that have come back so far, we are reviewing each of those and we've already had to take some measures. Obviously, Peel Forest was the number one on the list, but we've also got other significant ones that potentially we may have to take some action on. Ellis Road, just south of Timaru, and of course the one by the Petiti Point. So each of those is being assessed, and that's required. It's also become very much a government focus in recent times, and you'll see some considerable publicity or news reports about this. In many areas the government is supporting it, and they've actually used some of the waste levy now to actually support some of these closed landfill, I suppose, the remediation processes and the like, and in some cases, like in Peel Forest, it involves removing basically everything from the landfill. That's probably it for us in a nutshell. We'll take on board the financial questions that were raised and see what we can do in respect of that. But are there any other general questions at this stage?
Just your final point around the coastal erosion, that red roof's fine for 100 years.
Yeah.
Have they gone out longer, Grant, or is that the maximum? I'm always interested that, in 102 years, we're in trouble. So won't be my problem. But you know what I mean? Have we had any modelling further out that gives an estimate?
The answer is no. No, the maximum is 100 years. Yeah.
I've got one. So you made a very good point before that the rules now stop you from stockpiling clean fill. Now, I'm sure those rules were designed to cover off some other issues they have with lots of people who say they've got clean fill and that's why they're stockpiling and everything. Did you go back and have a bit of a pushback in terms of the fact that you were actually creating a resource that wasn't going into landfill for no other reason than costing us a lot of money, but had a very specific purpose to achieve an ends, which was to cap and make sure that it was done correctly.
I will defer to Justine for that because
Yeah,
they had direct...
so yeah, it was actually hard fill, and it comes in and around as what you can divert for waste levies. So it wasn't necessarily that can't stockpile it. Well, sorry, yeah, there's no, as far as I know, it'll say you can't stockpile that on land. However, we could not include it as a deferred material, therefore it automatically gets a waste levy and a carbon credit. And that's as per the MFE.
So basically, yeah, the government want their cut. Yeah, that's
Yes.
what it comes down to.
Yeah.
And we did, argue the point quite, significantly.
Comes down to the purpose of it, and it just seems what an absolute joke to put all that clean fill into our landfill.
That's correct.
Just on that, we don't necessarily have to put it into the landfill, we have to pay the levy and the carbon credit on it.
We do have some there at present which we're proposing. Our one project next year is, because of the budget, is to upgrade stage one, which it wasn't, as it said in the report. It hadn't been done correctly, the capping. It's not up to standard now, but we propose to bring that up to standard, and we have got some stockpile there which we will use for that.
Awesome.
Sorry.
Yep.
At the start of your presentation, you said that we're sort of disadvantaged in some situations, and we are recycling, like recovering 70% of what's going on, but because we've been successful, it's made it harder for some reason. Can you explain?
Yeah, so the New Zealand waste strategy, they're quite specific on reducing, say, individual household waste. So because we have implemented and it's now 4-bin, the majority of our material is already getting diverted. So they started at the very high point, as if you didn't have any of that diversion in place, and they said, if you reduce that by 10 or 40%, this is your target. Well, it's already above what we're achieving, because we're already diverting it. But we still have to follow that waste strategy.
It's crazy that you wouldn't push back or couldn't push back and say, well, actually, we're already doing it.
The key thing is the government and the Ministry of Environment works on percentages. Yeah, and so it's when you've got such a small percentage of waste that's not diverted, or a high percentage of the waste is diverted, it's harder to meet those targets.
Financial burden on us or not?
The targets aren't financial. The targets are purely, key performance indicator, but it's not.
It just means that when we present to you, you're going to see lots of red ones with the targets.
It's purely based on this is where you should be. There's no financial impact.
Alrighty, perfect. I think that brings us to a close. Thank you. That's really informative. Further questions come out of it, but that's really helpful. We will close off. We've got citizenship at 12:30. And if you're listening online, thank you for joining us. And then we'll have council meeting back at 2 o'clock, where we've got some interesting issues to discuss. So please join us again at 2 o'clock. Thank you.